In 1920, a very unusual court hearing took place in Australia. It attracted huge media attention, but unlike usual cases, the press wasn't interested in the crime itself. Instead, they were fascinated by the life story of one of the participants, especially a secret that he had carefully kept his entire life. Back on October 2, 1917, in a Sydney suburb, someone found human remains. They were partly buried in mud by the roadside. The body was burned so badly that figuring out who it was seemed impossible. Medical experts could only tell that the person had died about 2 days earlier. They thought it was probably a woman, around 40 years old, somewhere between 5 feet 1 inch and 5 feet 5 inches tall. That's all they could figure out with the medical know-how they had back then. The cops thought it was murder, but the medical guys couldn't find any proof. They actually thought the woman was still alive when she caught fire, thinking it might have been some kind of suicide. Hoping to find the dead woman's family, the police put notices in local papers about the body they found. Nobody came forward to claim the remains though, so they buried her as Jane Doe. That's what they call unidentified bodies in police work. About 2.5 years later, a young man named Harry Burkett walked into the police station with his aunt. They said they hadn't heard anything from Harry's mom, and Burkett, for over 2 years and wanted to report her missing. But they weren't her only relatives. The woman also had a husband named Harry Crawford, who didn't rush to contact the police, neither right after the woman's disappearance nor after some time. Harry Crawford was Anna Burkett's second husband. Her first husband, who was the father of her child, had died many years ago when the boy wasn't even 10, so Crawford was Harry Burkett's stepfather. Harry Jr. said that 2 years ago, when his mother disappeared, Crawford told him that his mother had run off with another man. Harry was totally shocked by this news. He kept waiting for his mom to get in touch, but as time went by, he started having more and more doubts about what his stepdad was telling him. The final straw came when Crawford suddenly announced they needed to move to another part of town for no clear reason. Harry knew his mom would never be able to find him at a new place, so he refused to go. That's when Harry and his stepdad went their separate ways. Harry told the cops the last time he saw his mom was in late September 1917. He also mentioned 3 super weird things that happened between him and his stepdad. At first he didn't think much of them, but the more he doubted Crawford's story about his mom, the more suspicious these incidents seemed. The first one happened on the outskirts of Sydney. Crawford took Harry to this big cliff that was notorious as a suicide spot. Crawford went right up to the edge and called Harry to come stand next to him. But Harry wasn't having any of that. He straight up refused. The second weird thing happened about a week later. Crawford led Harry into some bushes by the roadside and told him to dig a hole. He didn't explain why, and since Crawford was kind of a tough guy, Harry usually tried not to argue with him. It took Harry about 2 hours to dig that hole, and then they just left like nothing happened. The third incident went down in October 1917. Crawford brought home a newspaper and made Harry read this article about police finding some unidentified woman's remains in a Sydney suburb. At the time, Harry couldn't figure out why his stepdad was so interested in that article. It was only now that things were starting to click in his head. Harry's story had so many weird things in it that the cops figured that unidentified woman had to be his mom, Anna Burkett. Harry's stepdad's behavior was super suspicious, and he became the prime suspect in the murder of the woman they'd found. The police also thought Crawford had tried to kill Anne's son at least twice, but for whatever reason, he'd failed both times. It took them a while to track down Crawford. He was living on the outskirts of Sydney with his second wife Elizabeth. They'd been married for 9 months. When they finally arrested Crawford, he told the cops a story that completely blew their minds. Back in 1910, when Harry Crawford was 35, he was working as a driver for some fancy Sydney doctor. That's where he met the doctor's housekeeper, Anna Burkett. Crawford didn't exactly have a great reputation around town. Most folks knew him as the drunk who was always hanging out in bars. but he swore he'd change his ways for Anna, and in February 1913, they got hitched. But Crawford's promise to clean up his act didn't last long. Just a few months after the wedding, he was back to his old habits. According to him, his life with Anna was pretty peaceful, but their neighbors told a different story, said the couple was always fighting about Crawford's constant drinking. Then in 1917, their lives got turned upside down when this 19-year-old girl named Josephine moved in with them. Turned out she was Crawford's daughter. Other people had been taking care of her, but they'd recently died, so Crawford had to step up and take her in. Josephine acted really weird around her dad, always hinting that she knew some big secret about him. And Crawford seemed scared she might spill the beans to someone else. After Josephine moved in with Anna and Crawford, the couple started fighting even more than before. A month before Anna disappeared, she wrote this strange letter to her family saying she'd discovered something shocking about her husband and would tell them more soon. But she never got the chance to spill what she'd found out. According to Crawford, on September 28, 1917, he and Anna went on a picnic. At some point they got into another fight. He told the cops that during the argument, Anna slipped and hit her head on a rock. The hit supposedly killed her. Crawford claimed he had to burn and hide the body because nobody would believe how Anna really died. He said he didn't know Anna was still alive when he set her body on fire. He was right about one thing though, nobody bought his story. The police figured Crawford knew Anna was about to expose his secret. And to keep her quiet, he killed her. So, what was this big secret Harry Crawford had been keeping his whole life? A secret so important that he was even willing to kill his own wife after Josephine told her about it. Well, here's the bombshell. Harry Crawford wasn't Josephine's father at all. He was actually her mother. Harry Crawford was born in July 1875 in Livorno, Italy. At birth she was named Eugenia Fellini. The family moved to New Zealand when the girl was just 2 years old. During her teenage years, Eugenia worked a lot with her father. She cut her hair short and started wearing men's clothes. When the girl grew up, her family wanted to arrange her marriage. But Eugenia knew she didn't want to marry a man. Her parents were strict and wouldn't listen to her objections. Then something lucky happened. Everyone found out that her potential husband was already married and had a child. This discovery saved Eugenia from an unwanted marriage. She split from their parents' house and started living as a man under the name Eugene. Eventually, he moved to Sydney and became Harry Crawford. Crawford always took on tough men's work, worked at a rubber factory and in a meat department. Looking at this solidly built guy, nobody would have guessed they were actually a woman. Adding to the tough guy image was the fact that Crawford could drink pretty much anyone under the table. When everyone else at the meat shop bar was barely standing, Crawford was just getting warmed up. Crawford's secret only came out once, when they were 21 and working as Eugene at one of Sydney's port ships. One time at sea, the crew somehow found out he was actually a woman. Since having a woman on board was bad luck, the captain decided to punish Eugene by raping her multiple times before dumping her at the next port. Because of this, Eugene Fellini, aka Harry Crawford, got pregnant and had a baby girl in 1889 named Josephine. Crawford wasn't ready for all that, so he found a childless Italian couple and left Josephine with them. He'd visit her throughout her life, but they never really bonded. Still, Josephine knew Harry's big secret. When Crawford got arrested, he spilled the beans cause he knew if they sent him to a men's prison, it'd be bad news, just like on the ship. So, when they cuffed him, he straight up admitted he was a woman. Crawford ended up charged with killing Anna Burkett. His second wife, Elizabeth, was totally shocked. She had no clue he was a woman. Later, Crawford explained that neither Anna nor Elizabeth ever saw him completely naked, and during sex, he always used some kind of prop to fake being a dude. When they searched Harry's stuff, they found a locked leather suitcase with some interesting items inside. So, in October 1920, Harry Crawford's trial kicked off. But get this, people weren't really focused on the crime. They were all about the defendant's wild life story. The court found Crawford guilty and sentenced him to death. But a couple years later, they took another look and changed it to life in prison. Fast forward to February 1931. After 11 years behind bars, Harry Crawford got out early. But there was a big catch. The judge said Crawford had to live as a woman for the rest of his life. No more pretending to be a dude. After getting out, Crawford changed his name to Jean Ford. Sadly, Jean couldn't reconnect with her daughter cause Josephine died from TB while Jean was locked up. But Jean Ford did live out the rest of her days as a woman, just like she promised. On June 9, 1938, 63-year-old Jean Ford was crossing a street in Sydney when some car came out of nowhere and hit her. The cops called it an accidental death, but who knows? Maybe the driver was 38-year-old John Burkett, the son of Annie Burkett.